guys remember this crucible that essentially burned up. Turns out that burning graphite is actually endothermic. You have to add heat to get it to oxidize away, but obviously you can do it. Now, you compare that to this, which is essentially graphite clay. It does eventually vitrify, but it doesn't seem to sort of disappear. So I was wondering about that. If you look in the link below, you'll see this guy that makes his own clay graphite crucibles, and here's his formula. I've adapted it because he does it in large batches, but 6.6 parts of clay, some borosilicate glass, some silicon carbide, and some graphite. Mix them together. And since this is really kind of too big for what I want to do, I could spend some time looking over the internet to find a smaller clay graphite crucible, but thought I might try it myself. So graphite, silicon carbide, surprisingly easy to get. People use it in rock tumblers. Here's some clay. So the only thing I need now is some powdered borosilicate glass. Apparently this is what keeps the graphite from oxidizing. So there's some borosilicate glass. I've looked all over to try to find powdered borosilicate glass, and I can't find it. This is borosilicate glass. Pyrex is the trade name for it. So anyway, you see my problem. So before I do this, I think we can all agree that this is almost certainly a bad idea. Stronger than it looked. Now I've got to turn that into powder. So I wouldn't actually advise anybody to do that, what I just did. Besides the obvious dangers to your hands and eyes, there's also the question of all the dust that was raised up. I suppose you could get silicosis from it. Here's 238 grams of sifted crushed borosilicate, which is obviously contaminated with a fair amount of rock. You can see the abrasion on that. So I think I'm going to up my game on the borosilicate in my formula and hope that it doesn't screw me up. Everything I've got out of it is a broken kitchen implement, which I will have to hide from the missus. Anyway, I've got a 500 gram scale, so go ahead and make up a formula here and see how this stuff turns out. So my formula is going to call for 300 grams of graphite. The warnings on the package say that it's an incredibly fine powder and it's going to make a lot of dust, and I don't want to inhale it. Okay, this is 112 grams of silicon carbide. And I was supposed to put 75 grams of glass in here. I think I'm going to go for a little more than that. I've got 88 grams left on the scale before I top out, so let me just fill it up to there and then maybe add a skosh. Oh, it's letting me go higher. I didn't know it would do that. There's 530. That's enough. That's 118 grams. All right, let's get our clay. So we'll just start adding our dry mix and water to taste and knead it together till it's all in there. I have no idea how long this is going to take. I suspect you're in for a time lapse here. This concoction is described as feeling slightly slimy, and I can corroborate that. Pretty damn slimy. I think I've got it just slightly too wet, so I'm going to go ahead and hand mix it here in the air for a bit and then let it dry out, preparatory to trying to make some kind of a form. This actually seems to be coming along rather well. It's only been about 45 minutes, but it's really hot out here, and I've been kneading it in order to get it nice and even. There's still a few streaks of clay in it, but in general it seems to be of a nice even consistency. I'm going to bag this up in a bit because I don't want it to get too dry, because I've decided to use a press form technique, and I think I need a reasonable amount of plasticity in order to make that technique work. So let me show you what I'm thinking about that. What I'm going to do is make a plaster mold of an outside and an inside, and then I'm going to pour that mold, and then I'm going to try using a press mold in order to make this crucible. So here's my outside, or here's the outside mold, 2.5 inch mark, and I'm using like a gasket of clay. Been about an hour and 20 minutes, so let's see if I can unmold this plaster. And should have a negative mold so I can start on a positive mold. Yeah, that worked. All right, it's time to fill up my, I guess it's my positive image. I'm not completely sure. Essentially, this is the plunger that will build up the inside of the crucible. So here's where we are. Here's the box I used for casting my crucible forms. I'm calling this one my positive. I mean, it produces the inside of the crucible. It's nice and solid, but it's quite moist, so I need to let it dry for a couple of days before I start working it. This is the negative, meaning that it produces the outside of the crucible. And again, nice and solid. I've actually worked it a little bit, but it's still too wet, so I need to let it cool off or dry off for a little bit. And essentially what we'll do is we'll put it like that inside the box to use as a guide, put some clay in there, put this in, give it a squish, and then see if we can unmold it and have a crucible. That clay is really pretty slick, so I'm hoping it won't sort of adhere to this form. I'm hoping that it will work well with a press technique, and if it doesn't, we'll try something else. Also, of course, I made this using drinking cups. It's going to be primitive, but it'll be really interesting to see how my first crucible comes out, because I will then play around from there. I'll probably wind up making more of these forms. This is only a start. So we'll give it a couple days to dry out, and then we'll press out a crucible and see what we get. See if we can clean these things up, and then we'll assemble them into a usable press. I left them sitting out in the sun all day, so I'm hopeful they're dry enough to be workable. I've decided to paint this mold. I don't know if this is the right idea or not, mostly because I don't want it to randomly suck moisture out of my clay while I'm pressing. So this could be exactly the wrong thing to do. It might affect the adhesion of the clay positively or negatively, I don't know which. Probably try some releasing agents to see if I can, like talc or something, to see if I can more effectively mold. But anyway, we'll paint it up again. It's probably the worst possible idea, but we'll do it anyway. So I did actually manage to mold up a crucible. I set the clay out overnight to let it tacky up a little bit, and here it is. And it looks like ass. It's terrible. It's thick on, way too thick on the bottom, uneven on the sides. I mean, it's clearly the worst thing ever imagined by man. But I do have to admit, I did it. I was planning on letting the thing dry up and so that I could compare its appearance to the commercial crucibles and maybe put it in the fire and let it cook and see if it held up. But I've got a couple ideas for improvements, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and put this one back in the clay bag and let it melt again. Specifically, I was right when I said I might be wrong. I should not have painted this mold because the dehydration by the plaster sucking up liquid out of the clay is one of the ways you get it unmolded, and if the thing doesn't dry out, it doesn't unmold, so I have to get rid of that paint. So I'm going to try that tonight. I've already got this ready to go for tonight. I'm going to let it sit up until it hardens up a little bit, and I'm going to mold that thing tomorrow morning. But I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. Please feel free to like and subscribe. Tell your friends. I'll be back at the bathroom here this weekend. I've already got another couple of melting videos in the cooker, as it were. So thanks for watching.